and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, before we get into the main topic or any of the news stories, let's do two pieces of housekeeping. One, continue to ask questions for my Q&A. You have until the end of this week, and by the end of this week, I mean Friday. You have until Friday to ask the questions you want for this episode for the Q&A. Remember, everybody gets a 5-question limit. Here we go. Next thing is, by the time this episode comes out, I will have actually released the trailer for the big video project, which I can officially say is going to be a video essay about the history of how the internet influenced our politics. And even if you like that trailer, I gotta tell you one thing. Lower your expectations a little bit, because there were a couple of moments, there were a couple of things, as I'm recording this, and as that trailer's come out, I am not finished. I still have a couple more sections left to edit, but I have a, official schedule, and I got it, set up, edit this day, upload this day, export this day, blah, 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 I have that ready, I have that all set and ready. And I fully acknowledge the fact that it's not going to be 100% the standards that I want. There are going to be a lot of sections that are just not that good. I hope that what I have in the video makes up, what the audio of the video is. I hope that makes up for some lackluster visual qualities. When the video pops up in your feed, you guys are going to see why it took so long to make and why it is, I'll just say this right now, it is going to be very different from the other episodes that I have done. I tried my best to leave as little blank spaces as I could, but unfortunately, it still reared its ugly head. And if it is not as good as you want, good news is I will never do a project like this ever again, unless I am literally going to give the editing work to someone else, because I cannot do a project like that again. I tried my best to do it, and I really think that if I had... My biggest problem is the fact that I immediately jumped off from one big video project to the next big video project. I immediately jumped from the Silhouettes of the Past story arc immediately into editing and recording and producing this project. And I didn't take the necessary precautions that I needed to do this project 100% properly. I was close, but I just, literally, it was just kind of a bad thing. I thought that I could maintain the actual video schedule that I had and do this project, because again, I was just like, it's so long away, it's so far away, I don't need to worry about it. But as it kept encroaching, it's just and it's gonna be way worse, because this video will, of course, lead to probably a lot more traffic on this channel, because of the subject matter and the tags, probably. Tags will definitely get more people's attention. It'll definitely be more in line with the algorithm. Maybe I'll make a video explaining the fucking, ultimately, I had to have done the way things I did in order for the way... It's hard for me to explain, but, if I had done things differently, then things would have went differently. I wouldn't have 18K right now. I wouldn't have a video that has 18K. I don't have 18K. I have 1.800. But, if I didn't do what it was, if I didn't do all this prior, then I wouldn't be at the point where I am today. For better and for worse. I can't change the past. Move on to the future. Now, I know some of you might hear that and then immediately go comment and say, well, why don't you just delay the episode a little bit? No, I am not delaying this episode. I made this episode with the purest intention of it being released on August 1st. With the intention, if I fail in that, then there is no point. Then I have failed. Then you might say, but the video is not going to be 100% to your standards. Why? It's no. I would rather it be released and not be on my perfect standards, and to then move on to just move back to normal video schedule. I would much rather prefer that. Me, my mental health and everything, I would much rather prefer that than I would delaying this episode. there were like a couple of times when I was doing this production that I was literally just like contemplating just quitting entirely. Legitimately, I am just 100% okay with just uploading it as it was, as it is at that point, and then moving on. People who are able to make video essays like this like once a month or something, genuinely, you guys are like this, you guys are like troops. I can't imagine doing it like this forever. I can't imagine doing this. Granted, a lot of them I'm pretty sure have like other editors that have assisted them, and I have like one other person who assisted me with one section. But yeah, August 1st it will come out, and just take it for what it is. I literally recorded a disclaimer to be put at the beginning of the video to explain that it is not as good as it should be, and I fully acknowledge that. And I've already made one thing intentioned for something else that will happen later in the year. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, let's talk about some of the least controversial things ever. Israel proposed a vote in their Knesset, and the vote was regarding the idea of Palestinian statehood, and that's one of the big things a lot of people say, like, they want a two-state solution, so this is a pretty good indicator about whether or not Israel is serious about a two-state solution. And, surprise, surprise, Israel voted against a two-state solution. Overwhelmingly voted against a two-state solution. 68-9. 68 members of the Knesset voted no Palestinian state, and 9 voted for a Palestinian state. Now, unfortunately, as of the time I'm recording this, for some reason, the Knesset just has not released the vote totals. Like, we know that it's 68-9, and we know that, like, I mean, we just don't know what parties they were, because I was really hoping to, like, include, like, a party chart or something, and I was originally going to make a prediction, but then I was reading the rest of this article, and it mentions the fact that a lot of the center-left politicians in the Knesset weren't in the, like, chamber during the time of the vote. Which, I'm like, wait, does that mean that the Labour Party wasn't involved in this vote at all? And the article goes on to say that there was a similar proposal for a Palestinian statehood that was rejected in a 62-9 vote. But it explicitly mentions that the two parties that supported that specific bill was Hadash-Tal, which I very much expected was one of the member parties, and Ram, the other, like, Arab, like, is, like, the Arab Muslim party. Like, I mean, here are the parties, like, the United Arab List has 5 members of the Knesset, Hadash-Tal has 5 members of the Knesset, and the Labour Party, which technically is part of a new coalition called the Democrats with, like, Meretz, they have 4. That was my initial intention. That was my initial thought. Like, oh, so the 4 Labour Party MKs and the 5 Hadash-Tal MKs voted for it. But now I'm thinking, like, wait, hold on. Could it be Ram who joined with them? But then, like, who's that one member of Ram that, like, I don't know. Again, we'll have to wait and see when the vote totals are released. I am genuinely sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for that vote total to be released so I can officially, like, make a chart or do something with it. But yeah, shock and all shocks, it proves that Israel doesn't give a shit about a two-state solution, they don't give a shit about resolving the conflict, and they just hate people. Another news story involving Israel came from the recent International Court of Justice ruling, stating that Israel's presence in Palestinian territories is unlawful. The International Court of Justice has ruled that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful and should come to an end as rapidly as possible. Nawaf Salam, president of the ICJ in The Hague, read out a non-binding advisory opinion issued by the 15-judge panel on Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory on Friday. The judges pointed to a wide list of policies, including the building and expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, use of the area's natural resources, the annexation and imposition of permanent control over the lands, and discriminatory policies against the Palestinians, all of which it said violated international law. The court said Israel has no right to sovereignty of the territories. It violates international law against acquiring territory by force and is impeding Palestinians' right to self-determination. It said other nations were obliged not to render aid or assistance in maintaining Israel's presence in the territory. It said Israel must end settlement construction immediately and existing settlements must be removed, according to the summary of a more than 80-page opinion read out by Salam. Now that's a very interesting and very well thought out thing. Too bad, unfortunately, nothing is going to come of it. Very unfortunate truth. Nothing is going to come of this, unfortunately. Very sad truth. This is one of the biggest problems with the UN and, all this stuff. It's man, I wish the UN actually had, power or something. Because the UN is just not really doing anything. And another problem is that, as is typical, apparently the typical subjects randomly just go, yes. Now, we will move on to discuss the fact that, in actuality, we're in fact not going to do that, and in fact, you claiming that we should leave is actually anti-Semitism. That's weird. Huh? That makes sense. It's anti-Semitic to tell us to stop colonizing people's land. Wow, interesting. Speaking of colonization, let's move on to Arizona, because an interesting development is coming from Arizona, which is not necessarily that surprising, but is interesting to note nonetheless. Now, for those who don't know, there is one seat in Arizona that is being very much in play, and that is Arizona District 3. The seat currently held by Ruben Gallego. Ruben Gallego is, of course, running for the Senate race now, which has opened this seat up for grabs. And a lot of people have tried to jump into this race and make it theirs. And currently, the race is seemingly a two-person race. Technically, there are 3 candidates running, but realistically, the race is a 2-woman race. There's Yasamin Ansari, former Phoenix City Councilwoman, and Raquel Terán, former minority leader of the Arizona Senate. And one of the big things that is very interesting is the fact that seemingly there doesn't seem to be that much of an issue with either of them. They both seem like young, progressive sounding, candidates in the race. And they both, neither of them really screamed, I am the progressive. They weren't really, one of them wasn't, none of them were really going, I'm the Bernie candidate or I'm the Warren candidate or whatever. They weren't really making that point. They were, both running as generic Democrats, but also running as if they're progressive. Yeah. Yasamin being Iranian, Raquel being Hispanic. Both of them generally seem like young women of color who seem to be a very interesting choice for the race. And that has led to a lot of people to start looking at them and asking, one of the first things immediately to dictate how do these two differ on policy was a very simple question. What is your stance on Israel? And then everybody started combing through their records to try and figure out, okay, what is their stance on Israel? And that's when they started, making it at least that's when one of them started making it very well known their stance on Israel. Yasamin being, very open with the fact that she was pro-Israel. And then when they went to Raquel and said, hey, what is your stance on Israel? She was very mysteriously silent in that regard. It's not even necessarily to say, Raquel Terán is, super pro-Palestine. She said, the typical spiel of, I condemn the attacks on October 7th. Of course, everybody does. She's also maintained that Israel, quote-unquote, has the right to defend itself. But she's also, whenever they ask her, but what are your stance on things like a ceasefire? She's I like the idea of, a cessation of violence to, discuss things. And now, things have gotten a bit interesting because magically, Yasamin, coincidentally, out of nowhere, got a $1.3 million bankrolling into her bid by a PAC known as the Protect Progress PAC. Now, on paper, the PAC is pro-crypto, which makes sense. Yasamin, on her page, does have a part of her page that mentions that she's pro-cryptocurrency. But then you go to Open Secrets and start looking at the people that they've endorsed and given money to and against. And let's look at them, shall we? Here are the candidates that this PAC has decided to give to: Daniel Helmer in Virginia, Shamari Figueres in Alabama, Julie Johnson in Texas, Eugene Vidman in Virginia, John Ozaweski, Timothy Kennedy, and 3 incumbent members of Congress: Rob Menendez, Josh Gothenmeier, and Dan Goldman. Now, a couple of those names, of course, are familiar. Incumbents: Josh Gothenmeier, Dan Goldman, and Rob Menendez. We'll get back to them in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about the other candidates there. Like, Timothy Kennedy is, of course, very pro, Israel. I think that was one of the biggest criticisms that Nate McMurray did when he tried to briefly run against him. He's being bought by AIPAC and bought by all these, Zionist PACs. Helmer was running against a pro-ceasefire candidate and ended up losing. Vindman was running against Elizabeth Guzman, who is a progressive, or at least was progressive at one point, so there was some worry that she could potentially be a candidate that could be an issue. Olszewski, I originally thought that Olszewski was running in Harry Dunn's seat, the seat that Harry Dunn was trying to get, but no, I was confusing him with a different candidate. He was running in the safe seat next to him that was basically he was endorsed by the incumbent, so I was whatever. But the one that I found interesting is that I wanted to do a brief check because they also endorsed in the Alabama race, clearly in the runoff, because there's only 2 candidates listed from Alabama in the House seat: Shamari Figueres and Anthony Daniels. However, what's interesting is that one is for, the other is against. And apparently, this has nothing to do with Anthony Daniels being anti-AIPAC or anti-Israel. He was in fact super pro-Israel and was vying for AIPAC's endorsement. And then, coincidentally, he literally faked an endorsement from AIPAC, and then AIPAC then shifted their support and money and stuff to back Shamari Figueres, who ended up winning the seat. And you might be wondering, wait, why do I keep saying AIPAC and all this stuff regarding to it? Well, it's very clear this is a similar thing that happened last time, where what's the PAC's name? The PAC that SBF was involved with. It was allegedly a pro-crypto PAC, and then come to find out, the PAC was literally just basically giving money to pro-Israel Democrats in order to help them against anti-Israel incumbents or anti-Israel candidates. That's one of the reasons why fucking what's her name? Fucking, you know what? Donna Edwards, that's her name. Donna Edwards. It's one of the reasons why she lost, because she was fell for this. And it was the same reason why fucking Maxwell Frost ended up winning, because he was a pro-Israel Democrat. And clearly the same thing is happening in this race. And unfortunately, it might work a little bit, because it turns out Yasemin is apparently polling higher than Raquel. And that's good enough for me. Vote for Raquel. It's the last victory that progressives could get. Based, if true. Again, she's not even necessarily the biggest pro-Palestinian Democrat or whatever, but yeah, she seems to be better than Yasemin. And next story, a very tragic thing that happened to Donald Trump. He picked J.D. Vance to be his vice presidential nominee. And absolutely nothing else happened. Nothing at all happened before that. Nothing happened. Nothing at all happened. Man, changing the video schedule where I record the video on Friday now stinks, because now I got to miss one of the biggest fucking events apparently in history. Not gonna discuss it here. We're gonna talk about J.D. Vance. Honestly, there's not much for me to say on that, because J.D. Vance is kind of I could say a lot of things. I could say J.D. Vance called Trump Hitler, which, shocking, evil rhetoric. How dare he? He should be blamed for literally everything that happens to Donald Trump now. If he stubs his toe, it's because you called him Hitler. But yeah, Vance, all honestly, probably should have been an easy idea choice, because Vance, similar to Trump, basically runs on this veneer of populist sounding rhetoric, I really do care about the poor, low, middle class, whatever. and then in actuality, he just serves the same corporate interests as every other Republican. But then again, that literally narrows it down to literally every Republican basically is that now. The only thing that stinks is that it wasn't fucking Tulsi, who I thought it was gonna be. Anyway, I thought he was just gonna, I don't know, I don't really know, because I don't really live in the Trump world, so I don't know how popular Vance is, really. So, whatever. I had another story about Bob Menendez and his fucking corruption, but who gives a shit, really? Let's move on to the main topic of this video. We're going to be talking about my problems with the movement for socialism, political instrument for the sovereignty of the peoples, also known as MAS-IPSP, or simply MAS, a left-wing political party in the country of Bolivia. It was formed by a man that we all know as Juan Evo Morales Ayma, after a long, funny, finagling story. Quite literally, I'm kind of glad that I shifted the focus of the story to this, kind of to be about a little bit of the history of the organization, because I really do think that the story behind MAS as a party is really fucking weird, and ironically, makes Evo Morales into a way better leader of a political party than I even remotely thought prior. Now, let's give a little bit of context first. In Latin America, a political ideology known as Phalangism was very popular. Phalangism is basically a fascistic ideology primarily focused in Spanish-speaking areas. It was technically the ideology of Franco, but it's kind of a bit more... It's a little bit hard to explain without going fully in depth, but yes, it is a fascistic ideology that kind of has its focus in Spanish-speaking countries. If you go to any fascist party in Latin America, at least after the history of Franco, literally, Phalangism is usually listed as part of its philosophy. Bolivia was no exception because they had a very noticeable Phalangist faction of the electorate. And they tried to do the whole, it's funny because I think it's because, Latin America was kind of seen as so removed from the Western world, they literally tried to pull the whole National Socialism trick by having a lot of people in those countries think that, in fact, Phalangism and socialism are uniquely, intertwined. By having a lot of the Phalangist parties having the word socialist in their name, a party known as the Bolivian Socialist Phalange, forming in 1937, and 50 years later, the left-wing faction of the Bolivian Socialist Phalange was like, you know what, dudes? Fuck off. We're gonna form our own political party. And, you wanna know what that political party was called? Movement for Socialism. But wait, there's more. Completely unrelated from the Phalangist movement, there was a political organization known as the Assembly of the Sovereignty of the Peoples, which was supposed to be a vehicle for activists and indigenous people in Bolivia standing up against the neoliberal establishment. But there was a little bit of a problem. One of the leaders of this organization was having some issues with some of the other leaders and was frequently butting heads with them. Said leader was a man by the name of Evo Morales, who, after having too many disagreements, decided that he was going to form a new organization called the Political Instrument for the Sovereignty of the Peoples. That would be an independent organization that would be completely separate and would basically do its own thing. But there was a bit of a problem. The party that he left, the group that he left, was already in the position of forming a political party to start running and running candidates. Evo wanted to do the same thing, but he just left the organization that had all the party infrastructure. He's like, well, shoot, what do I do now? And then he noticed that Movement for Socialism, they had a ballot line that they just were not using. The party had essentially gone dormant after a while and was just not interested in doing any electoral work. So Evo Morales literally walked up to MAS and just said, hey, buddy, can I have your ballot line? Can I just steal your ballot line and use it for my political gain? And the leaders of MAS agreed on the condition that Evo not change the branding, That party still had to be called MAS, and they had to keep all of the current branding. Like that blue flag, that was the flag of the fucking like fascist party, the phalangist party. That was their branding. Evo agreed and managed to not only completely change the party's ideology, but also turn MAS from a literal footnote in the discourse to being the fucking dominant political party in Bolivia. Quite literally, look at their vote totals during Evo's tenure. 2002, they had gotten like a little over like 20% of the vote. I mean, literally over 20, literally a little over 20% of the vote, 20.9. Then 2005, 53.7, 64.2, 61.4, and there was a little bit of a shoot down in 2019, 47.1. But yeah, Evo, he went crazy. He went ham. He went ham like crazy. Then, similar results in the Chamber of Deputies to the Senators race. Originally being opposition, then getting majorities. Even to the point where in like 2009, 2014, the party ended up getting super majorities in both chambers. Evo literally just magic man. And much like Hugo Chavez from the last episode, Evo became a very controversial figure fast, standing up for indigenous rights and helping push for socialism of the 21st century in the mainstream. Evo, like basically every pink-tide leader, very controversial for both valid and invalid reasons. But MAS was very popular, and so was Evo. In fact, they were so popular that the only way for people to stop them was a literal coup. A coup that, while defeating Evo for the short term, eventually MAS succeeded and picked a new presidential candidate. In fact, I'll mention this a little bit because I think this adds a little bit of context, because this is something that a lot of people might not know. Okay, so I think I might have covered this in my video about the Bolivian election in 2020, but here's what ended up happening. MAS was a little bit divided on how they were going to move forward without Evo Morales. Like, some of them, there were a very small subsection of them that really just wanted to put Evo back on the ballot, but it was that was just not an option. Not an option at all. So, one thing that ended up happening was that a group called the Unity PAC in MAS proposed a candidate by the name of David Choquehansa, who was Evo Morales' Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he was, I don't necessarily know how necessarily all the issues regarding the lead and power of Bolivian politics was, but it seems like a lot of people seem to think that that guy was kind of the next in line. It seemed like a lot of people were very much infatuated with the idea of him running for president. But Evo and him were having a little bit of problems behind the scenes, because David was kind of making himself a bit more focused and central to a lot of things. And one thing that ended up happening was Evo was a little afraid of this guy's power, so he fired him from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and then hired him to be the Secretary General of the ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our Americas, which is basically the group that helps pink-tide nations align with each other. There are technically 10 full members of the organization, but for the most part they are basically just Bolivia, Venezuela, and Nicaragua and Cuba, who kind of form an alliance with each other. It's like a trade alliance and whatever. But Evo basically put him in that position, silently forcing him away from Bolivian politics. And when that group wanted to propose him as the presidential candidate, Evo basically told all of them, shut up. Meet the presidential nominee, Luis Alberto Arce Catacora. David can be the VP nominee. And while MAS was a little bit what? But they were just you know what? Fine. Whatever. We'll just decide to go with who Evo wants, and we will unite behind them. And that led to MAS getting the biggest vote total in their entire history. Over 3 million votes, 55.10%, Percentage-wise, it's of course not that good. It's the vote total that got people's attention. And there are a couple of things that are very interesting about the David versus Arce comparisons. But one of the biggest things that is very interesting is the comparisons between Arce and Evo. Arce is not Morales by a lot of ways. First sense is the fact that he's literally not indigenous. And Arce has a little bit of a different campaign style. See, and it all stems from circumstances. Evo had a supermajority and didn't really need assistance from the opposition in order to maintain that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, Arce does. He only has a majority. So, while he doesn't have to necessarily be too conciliatory to the opposition, he does have to, somewhat reach across the aisle and get things done. And it's also just a similar campaign, styles and rhetoric. Evo's, the firebrand populist. I'm the guy. I'm going to make all these big, speeches and whatever. He's, that kind of politician. Meanwhile, Arce is your typical politician. For people who are dumb American brain who don't understand this, compare, Luis Arce and Evo Morales. The comparison to them for America, in my mind, would be AOC and Rashida. AOC is sort of the strategy one, the one that's more willing to work with other people. Meanwhile, Rashida's the firebrand, the one that's mad, the one that'll do things that are perceived as dumb in order to push the message. Again, not necessarily saying this strategy or this strategy is inherently worse than the other. There are some elements that are good of both of them. I admire both AOC and Rashida Tlaib, much in the same way I admire Arce and Evo. But you get what I'm saying. Broadly, they're of the same ideological bend, but they're not one-to-one. If you want to do a pink tide comparison, have it be Evo versus Arce is Hugo Chavez versus Lula da Silva. Again, love them both. Perfect. But they definitely have noticeable differences. But now that I've expressed a little bit of history, why don't we actually talk about my problems with the organization? Now, this episode can kind of be changed title-wise. I don't necessarily have to call this my problems with. I probably will. You might notice, depending on how I do this, the episode's title might be slightly different. It's not necessarily my problems with, because for MAS, it is more accurately described as my problem with. Really, most, if not all of my grievances rely around one central problem. And I just have to say it. My problem with MAS-IPSP, I never thought I'd have to say this, but my problem with MAS-IPSP, for lack of a better term, is Evo Morales, which probably will require long as fuck story as well, but again, bear with me. It'll make sense. Evo was elected as president of Bolivia in 2005. Went through his first term, no really big issue, but one of his big things, like a lot of Latin American leaders, is changing of the country's constitution. Right at the tail end of it, he drafted and ratified the new constitution in 2009. And this new constitution, in 2009, stipulated that there would be a 2-term limit on presidents. Aight? Based. Whatever. Term limits are not necessarily the worst idea ideologically. I think most of us would probably generally agree that term limits are a good idea. And while this was going on, Evo was actually running for another term. Okay, cool. Yeah. Based. Whatever. Amazing. But then, during 2014, when the 2014 election rolled around, MAS and Evo started going, technically, since this rule of term limits was only implemented in 2009, the 2006 to 2008 term doesn't count. So technically, Evo Morales, can run for a third term. But remember, this is my last term. Guys. I get to run into the 2 terms for this new constitution. And Bolivian courts were like, that makes sense, yeah, fine, whatever. And before anybody goes in the comment section to try and be like, Evo Morales, blah, 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 like trying to claim that Evo Morales is a dictator, Evo Morales is democratic backsliding, whatever. We've done that same thing in the United States before. Unless you're going to denounce when we in the United States have done that, then you can't really make that claim for Evo. Like, yes, remember, when we implemented the term limits in the United States, we were allowing another president to run for technically a third term. Roosevelt and Truman got elected in 1945. Roosevelt died and essentially got Roosevelt's entire fourth term. Like, he died very early on in the fourth term, so basically Truman got the entirety of the fourth term. Then he ran for a term of his own. And then, because we literally implemented the two-term precedent during that time, they were literally like, you know what, Truman, if you want to run for a third term, that's fine, but you're the last guy who can do it, buddy. But you know what, whatever. You know what, yeah, fine. Evo finagled his way into another term. Whatever. But, hey, he'll leave the term after this time, right? Well, MAS started getting a little bit antsy about a potential post-Evo Morales world. Now, as I've mentioned, Evo Morales, he wasn't the only member of MAS who was seen as a very prominent figure. That David guy I mentioned before, the fucking vice president, Alvaro Marcelo Garcia Linera, the guy who ended up becoming the successor, Luis Arce, any of those guys could have been a perfect successor to Evo Morales. MAS had the support. Basically, any member of the party could have been a very viable choice to pass the torch on. But they were a little afraid of a post-Evo world. So, MAS and Evo pushed for a constitutional referendum to make it so that term limits are declared unconstitutional. Keep in mind, this is the constitution that fucking Evo Morales wrote. But it failed. It failed. Like, after the vote total turned out, 51-48, it failed. You know what, fine. Most people would go, you know what, yeah, fine. You know what, I've had my fill. I'm pretty much done. But MAS pushed their Supreme Court to overturn it. And then they did. Which a lot of people used as justification for the 2019 coup. That Evo Morales was democratic backsliding, and that he was doing all these bad, shitty stuff. Now, whether or not you believe that this is bad and shady or whatever is irrelevant. That's what the pretext they used. Is it like some people say, is it illegal, or is it democratic backsliding, is it Evo being a dictator? No, not necessarily. But I definitely agree that it's definitely like, if I were in the room with Evo, I would have told him, after this term, you're done, man. You should just pass the torch to your vice president. Or even if he just wanted to push forward the referendum, it's like, fine, but after the referendum, you're done. If it fails, you fail. But after a MAS mobilization, Luis Arce was elected president. MAS was finally back in control. But during the presidential election, there was always this big thing, because one of the big fear tactics was not necessarily towards MAS. Like, I mean, yes, it was to MAS, but one of the biggest criticisms and one of the biggest fear-mongering tactics that the Bolivian opposition said about Luis Arce was that they believed that Arce was just going to be a puppet of Evo, that once he became president, he would bring Evo back, and he would either do some big ceremonial thing to put Evo back in the presidency, or he would basically just serve as a puppet for Evo. With the party chair at the time clearly stating explicitly, categorically, Evo will not interfere with the government of brother Luis Arce. We believe our comrade Morales should rest, while brother Luis Arce takes the lead. And Arce himself explicitly stating, he, meaning Evo, will not have any role in the government. Which put people's minds at ease. Which put Arce back into the presidency. And Evo would return back to Bolivia and be very happy. Then one day he randomly just shows up to the presidential palace, and that's when it started hitting people about one big thing. It seems like when Artise and Evo were both making the claims, oh, Evo's not going to play any role in the administration. Evo's not going to play any role in the administration. Evo's not going to play any role in the administration. Looks like they were both telling completely different things. You see, it looked like when Evo was saying that, he was like, but come on, we know I will, man, come on. But when Arce said it, he's like, no, I mean it. He will not play a role in the administration. Yeah, but come on, man, we both know you're just fucking around for the cameras. He's like, no, you're not the president anymore. I am. And I will do things in my office without your consent. Yeah, but come on, man. No, out. I am the president. Yes, Arce just said, yeah, I'm the president, you're not. Evo was not going to take part in the positions and government positions, either formally or informally. He's not going to be a cabinet member. He's not going to be an advisor. Nothing. And, very hot take, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I'm just going to say it's a hot take so I can pretend it's a big and amazing. That's a good thing. 100% that is a good thing. Whether or not you agree that Evo Morales has done good for Bolivia or bad for Bolivia, it is good that a transition of power happens. Evo is no longer president. He should not be the one who dictates policy. Arce is the president now. He should be the one that dictates policy. And hopefully the people will support his policies, oppose his policies, and then the election happens, and that's when the people of Bolivia will make their choice next time. And this tackles a problem that I explicitly have with a lot of left-wing parties, figures, and otherwise. The inability to move on. Like, I mean, I'm on the left. I admire a lot of figures. I'm fucking wearing a Che Guevara shirt right now. But if you also know me, you know that, like, my belief that hero worship is just ultimately extremely detrimental to the left. And extreme adherence to one person's ideology and viewpoint is completely antithetical to anything that a person who is on the left is supposed to advocate for. And in the context of the modern day, with politics and otherwise, there's going to be a time where we have to let those figures go. And it's weird. We acknowledge this when it comes to figures we don't like, but when it comes to figures that we do like, all of a sudden it's like, no, that's different. Like everybody was demanding, like, Feinstein, why are you fucking in here, bitch? Why are you not retiring? People are demanding that Joe Biden should not run for re-election, but then make any of that mention about Bernie, and then all of a sudden, oh, how dare you? It's like, yeah, ultimately at one point, Bernie's either going to have to retire, or he is going to have to resign, or something. Or in the most literal sense, there's a chance that he will die. And we gotta accept that fact and move past it. Bernie's not going to run for president again. Lula will not run for president again. Melechon will not run for president again. And, hot take, Evo should not be back in the presidential palace. Evo should not be running again. But for some reason, Evo does not accept that. Evo doesn't want that. Now, it could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe he feels like he deserves that term that was taken away from him. Maybe he just wants to remain in power forever. But either way, Evo refuses to even have that in his perspective. And he has made it a point to now go on the offensive for Arce, claiming that Arce is in fact actually a neoliberal pawn, and he's secretly trying to destroy MAS from within. Keep in mind, this is the guy Evo chose to be the nominee for MAS. MAS was on their way to pick someone else, but Evo was the one who stepped in and said, no, Arce should be the one who is the nominee. Because he thought Arce was easier to control. David was very much like Evo Morales, indigenous, and very active in a lot of these social movements. Luis Arce was not like that. In fact, if I remember correctly, I know this fact, Luis Arce he had cancer, and he was getting treatment for it. And if I remember correctly, he was getting treatment for it at the time. Like, when he was coming back, that was when his treatment was, like, basically done. Yeah, I just checked. Yeah, that kind of is what happened. He left office on June 24th, 2017, and would end up taking his office of Minister of the Economy back in January of 2019. Like, right before the coup happened. Like, Evo thought that Arce would be so easy to control. And then now, because Arce is not being easy to control, now all of a sudden he's like, oh, you see, Arce was actually the bad guy the whole time. Ignore the part where I literally gave him I entrusted him enough to be in my cabinet, and I entrusted him enough to pick him to be the successor of my party. This guy's actually a snake. Like, I mean, he cites some, like, vague, like, BS, like, oh, I think there was, like, a couple of indigenous people who did a strike, and then Arce, like, told them, like, hey, don't strike anymore. Like, he didn't want them specifically to strike. This is proof that he's actually a traitor. He's actually trying to destroy MAS from within. And I need to explain a little bit before I get to explain, like, why he thinks that he's trying to destroy MAS from within. But this is fucking hilarious, okay? So, Evo, of course, has some people in his party that are very enthusiastically supportive of him. And he called those supporters and allegedly made a claim to Arce's supporters and saying, hey, we should all come together and form this big MAS conference. And then, at this MAS conference, he and his coalition, like, due to the fact that he announced it, like, very late in the game, not even giving Arce and David the chance to, like, coming there, like, he didn't give them the chance to even show up. He and his supporters basically announced, yeah, since Arce and David aren't going to be here, we're just going to say that they're no longer members of MAS and expel them from the party. And since they're expelled, they can't be the MAS candidate in 2025 when the next presidential election is coming up. Well, what a coincidence. Me, Evo Morales, I will run to be the president of, like, Bolivia in the next election. Like, yeah. He literally just randomly just like, yeah, fuck Arce, I'm going to run for president in 2025. It's like, excuse me? You didn't even give Arce a chance to show up and make his case. And now you're going to claim that you are the candidate? And this is where things get a little bit iffy again, because why does he think that Arce is trying to take down MAS from within? Well, when posed with this hypothetical scenario of Evo Morales running for another term in this election, the Supreme Court has decided to look over the Supreme Court, like the last Supreme Court ruling about term limits again, and ruled that term limits were in fact valid, thus forbidding Evo from running in the 2025 election. And that is Evo Morales claiming that the party, that they are going to try and ruin MAS from within. Wait, where's the ruining, where's the destroying MAS part? Could be interesting. Evo says destroy MAS, and what actually he means is ruining his own political career? Interesting. And it's funny, because Evo Morales literally started using, like, the exact same talking points that were used against him. Literally, he was starting to claim, like, oh, you see, Arce is secretly controlling the courts. When it's like, no, the Supreme Court in Bolivia is an elected position, and they are elected to 6-year terms. Yeah, 6-year terms, and 6 years before today is 2018. I mean, some of them have been there for a bit longer, but yeah, from what I've gathered, I can't really find much info on, like, the specific Supreme Court justices. I would love to see, like, them, like, saying, like, oh, this guy entered in this year, blah, blah, blah. But some of them have been around longer. But yes, from what I've gathered, they couldn't have been around, like, exclusively during Arce's time period. They were around during Evo's tenure. I guarantee you, some of these justices probably ruled for his, like, not being allowed to run in the election. Like, they ruled for him to run previously, and they probably ruling now that he can't run. Like, for real, like, he's literally just turning around and using the exact same talking points that were used against fucking him. Without any shred of irony. He's trying to tell people, like, oh, Arce is secretly a dictator. Arce is democratic backsliding, all this stuff. He's taking control of the courts. Like, dude, you were the person that they were targeting with these exact talking points previously. And this is one of the reasons why I started, like, kind of distancing myself from Evo, because it's just like, really? And then it got even worse when Evo, during the fucking coup attempt against Arce, like, we don't remember, there was like Arce like fired a general, and that general was like so pissed that he tried to like kill Arce, and then Arce was so badass that he literally faced fucking the coup general head on, which instantly makes him more badass than Evo. Evo turned and ran. Arce stood face to face against the guy. Evo, during the coup, oh man, how dare he? We need to unite together as Bolivians. Second the coup is over, Arce secretly orchestrated the coup to boost his chances because he's afraid of facing off against me in 2025. And it's even gotten to the point where when they went to go to the electoral tribunal to like negotiate how things will work, because that's another thing that's interesting. The parties are literally allowed to go to the places, like the parties and the presidential nominees and some of their posses are able to go to these places and basically just say, here's how we're going to conduct the next elections. Here are the things that we're going to do to make things fairer. Here are the things that we're going to do to make things like easier, blah, blah, blah. And Evo decided to show up as well because he's like, I'm a candidate to the next election. And apparently some of Evo's supporters got so mad that they got into a conflict with the Arce supporters. And I've tried to like verify who exactly was the first person to attack, but from what I've gathered, it seems to be that Evo supporters are the ones who started the attack. Because I didn't want to put blame on it at first, but what ended up happening is that there's footage of like a person who is a mayor who is representative of MAS who showed up, and then one of the Evo supporters literally like threw a rock at him. Like somebody threw a rock at him, and I don't have any necessarily claims that it is in fact an Evo supporter. I mean, shock all shocks, when people are showing up wearing the exact same uniform of a party, it's a little hard to tell who's who. But I gotta take a wild guess, it'd probably be the ones who are very insistent on having Evo as the candidate and not the ones who are confident about the fucking president that they have at the moment. And it's really just depressing to see that a lot of Evo's supporters have kind of basically just turned into a personality cult surrounding him. To the point where they literally defend Evo Morales on literally everything. And that's the part where I'm going to have to get into one huge elephant in the room that I have yet to discuss, and I don't think I've discussed it a lot on this channel prior, because it's a very, very big, very interesting story. And it could probably make or break your interpretation of Evo Morales, regardless on which side you are on this issue. And it's regarding a very big accusation levied towards him. After Evo Morales was deposed in the 2019 coup, August of 2020 to be exact, the exact date after that being August of 2020, the government of Janine Áñez revealed that Evo Morales would be facing 2 allegations of statutory rape. One involving a girl who was 15 years old, claiming that she had a child with Evo when she was 16 years old, and another with a girl who was 14 and had allegedly had a long-term relationship with Evo Morales. Now, if you notice, one aspect I didn't mention about Evo Morales was his personal life in regards to his marriages or relationships or whatever. And that's because, for 2 reasons. 1, it's not really relevant, but 2, because Evo Morales doesn't have any really personal relationships in that regard. Like, I mean, his first lady was his sister, and he was kind of known for being a little bit of a womanizer. I mean, he had 2 kids from different mothers, so yeah, it was pretty obvious that Evo kind of got around. But this? Well, where's the proof? What is the thing? Like, I mean, it's a little bit hard to jump from, like, you don't have a girlfriend to you're in relationships with minors. It's a little hard to make that jump. What's the actual proof, or proof, quote-unquote, that this happened? Well, one thing that is very, very interesting is that allegedly at some point, Evo literally stated that when he retires, he would want to end his year of office with his, quote, his land of coca, his quinceañera, and his charango. Now, all three of those things require some explanation. Coca is a plant that can sometimes be used to make a little, but it also has other elements, but it's been one of the major accusations against Evo Morales. Like, oh, he turned his country into a narco state because he loves coca. A charango is known as a guitar. And the one term that you might be the most familiar with is the term quinceañera, which is the, which is the, basically the sweet 16 for Latin American girls, but instead being 15. So, that begs the question, what the fuck does he mean by that? Like, shockable shocks, Evo Morales is not celebrating his 15th birthday no time soon. So what does he mean by his quinceañera? And the thing is, I've desperately been trying to find a clip of him saying this, because I need to see a clip of this if it exists, because I've only seen it brought up in the context after these allegations came up, and yeah, that's literally the only time I've seen these things ever come up. The closest I think I could have found is maybe a 2010 paper that said that again. Found that says oh, according to this clip or whatever, he said this. It's I need that clip. If anybody here has that fucking clip, I desperately need that clip. That clip will be 100% verifiable proof. Literally, Bolivians who are on this in the comments, comb through literally everything. Find me anything that could even remotely indicate that this clip is real. I genuinely need this. But what are some what are some proofs about the specific allegations? Well, for the former, there are pictures of the alleged victim and a copy of the birth certificate of the child with Evo listed as the father. But apparently there's some discrepancies in the birth certificates because all of them have the same number on top and the QR code printed on it is the same, but it doesn't lead to the same info as the paper. So it's a lot of people claim that those are forgeries. So yeah. And apparently this isn't the fucking first time that fake children have been used to discredit Evo Morales. During the lead up to that constitutional referendum, there was an allegation that a state employee named Gabriel Zapata and him were having an affair, and it was leading to corruption charges between the two, because he was secretly paying for her and her child with him, and Evo was like, wait, what child, huh? And it turns out, there was some shady business dealings going on behind the scenes. Then when the journalist went to talk to the kid, hey, whoa, dude, how'd you figure this out? He's like, dude, I was just fucking joking. I just completely made up this kid. I didn't know any of this shit was real. However, the other allegation is where things get a bit more complicated. And it is the story of a girl named Noemi Meneses, who reportedly met Evo Morales when she was only 14 years old. Her and Evo seemed to interact a lot. There are a lot of pictures and messages between the two. Apparently, 101 pages worth of messages between the two. Now, I haven't seen these messages. I seen, when I went to look through these, I did see things that, would probably tell me, something, but I haven't seen these messages. If anybody who speaks Spanish, please, with this stuff, please, tell me the messages. Just give me the messages, and give me specific messages that say that give me sussy things. I would genuinely be interested in seeing this. Yes, I have a bias about Evo, but dude, give me the facts. I want the facts, not fiction, not to live in the fake fantasy world. We deserve to know the truth. Now, apparently, it was even to the point where she was invited to an official event with Evo Morales, and while there, he was being interviewed by a journalist, and that journalist had a photographer. And the journalist mentions a young girl near Evo Morales, but then when the journalist is going to take pictures, Evo Morales specifically requests that the journalist do not take any pictures of her. She was even to the point where she was flying to meet Evo Morales while he was in fucking exile. People were very suspicious. Luis Arce is on camera with her. When he went to go meet Evo Morales, he was with her, and he literally has to explain, I have no clue who this woman is. She just showed up, and I just took a picture with her because I thought she was a fan of Evo or something. And how the situation ended up playing out was basically people were trying to investigate two things. One, were they in a romantic and or sexual relationship? And two, if so, how long? Because like, let's do a hypothetical. There's a hypothetical scenario where maybe him and her met when she was 14 and he was, like, old man, and they didn't do anything until she became legal. That's still very suspect and could be, like, grounds for, like, potential grooming allegations, but they were trying to, like, that was the thing. That was what they were trying to figure out. And that's when things started getting complicated again, because, shock of all shocks, these allegations ended up just becoming fucking partisan. Like, if you were anti-Evo Morales, you were claiming that he was a pedophile and all this, like, groomer shit. If you were pro-Evo Morales, you were like, no, these are allegations made up by the neoliberal establishment to ruin Evo Morales' chances and trying to tarnish MAS' reputation. And, for some reason, Meneses is the one who ended up getting the shit for this. Pro-Evo people, like MAS and a lot of its supporters, were like, fuck you, you're evil, you're, like, working with the neoliberal establishment. And then, things got worse when Naomi revealed very big development. She revealed that she was forced to testify against Evo Morales against her will out of fear of persecution for terrorism by the anti-Evo establishment, even claiming that they had forced her to, like, be starved. Like, they starved her for 2 days specifically so that they can get her to, like, do what she says, do what they say. Now, she didn't necessarily deny the allegations directly, but she made it very point, like, these allegations were brought up through very suspicious circumstances, maybe indicating that it's a very complicated scenario. But now, the people who are anti-Evo Morales were now shitting on her for being a turncoat. Meanwhile, the pro-Evo people were shitting on her for disgracing their lord. So now, she's being shunned by both sides of the aisle, to the point where she was forced to leave Bolivia at some point. And then, very coincidentally, the second MAS got back in control, all the charges were dropped, the investigations were halted, and nothing really came of it. Very disappointing. I 100% wish that these investigations continued under MAS. I think these would have led to a way better result. If they were bogus, MAS should have been able to use everything in the investigation to prove that it's bogus. If they were real, then they should have allowed this to go, on to prevent Evo Morales from potentially doing any shady things with other minors. Like, I mean, I generally don't necessarily think that the story is 100% true, but I can't necessarily say with 100% certainty, like, oh, this story is completely false. Because again, I haven't seen all the 101 of those texts. If you're a Spanish speaker, please send me the text. Send me the specific texts that are very sussy-baka. Very much. I would genuinely like to see that. And don't tell me, like, oh, in this text he said this. No. Page number, give me the text. I can translate it myself. You can give me your translation as well, but give me the specific one, the specific page, so I can also translate it and verify the accuracy of your statement. But yeah, biggest issue with MAS is very simple. Let Evo go. Like, literally, let the man go. If you do not set up your party for the next generation, you will fail. And unfortunately, I don't want to be too doomer for MAS. MAS has made big changes and strides before, but unfortunately, if they don't change things up, then I don't think they're going to have an Arce style win anytime soon, especially if they're literally going to put all their eggs in the Evo Morales basket. That's pretty much all I have to say. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when the future video of mine comes out. And if you want more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.